On my very first order, it was a $1,500 order. The 3PL actually lost my items. It didn't even get sent out to the carrier. They lost my items. There's not a lot of 3PLs out here that actually empower founders. Every order represents someone's brand at the end of the day. Some clients will come in and say, I need refrigerated items. And I've heard 3PLs say, oh, we'll figure it out. But really, they can't figure it out. When you're working with a 3PL, in my opinion, trust is never proven when everything goes right. It's proven by what someone does immediately after a mistake has
Raheem,
happened.
thanks a lot for coming on the Shot to Scale podcast, man. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure, Devesh. It's amazing to be a part of this.
Definitely, man. Looking forward to getting into all things 3PL and warehousing and all that good stuff. But before we get into that, Raheem, I wanted to start off with your background. You were, if I'm not mistaken, an e-commerce seller in the past, and then you went into warehousing to 3PL. So just kind of walk us through like your personal journey of how you actually got here from the e-commerce side to this side now.
Yeah. No, I like kind of sharing this story because so my name's Raheem, founder of Get Set Prep. We are a Toronto-based 3PL and fulfillment, so we support CPG brands, e-commerce brands all across Canada and the US. So a lot of US brands that want to get in and start selling in Canada. So before even starting Get Set Prep, like you mentioned, Devesh, I was an e-commerce seller myself. There were a couple of ventures that I went through before even opening up Get Set Prep. So the very first one to get myself, even as a brand owner, during the height of COVID, my wife and we actually created a brand. It's called The Ugly Workshop. So what we did was sell ugly Christmas sweaters. Everyone was excited about virtual Christmas parties. And we said, hey, you know what? Let's get into it. And I'm like, I think I have a perfect name for ugly Christmas sweaters, the Ugly Workshop. It was, it was it was a fun time, right? I know everything that like founders go through and all the late nights and sleepless nights, to get your brand up and running. And at the time, we both were full-time at our day jobs, starting a brand. One of the challenges that we were going through was how do we fulfill all these orders in time, right? And make sure everyone is able to get their products in time and whatnot. So this is where I actually started getting more exposed to the 3PL world and understanding from other 3PLs, what are some of the requirements? What are some of their minimums? What is it that I need to do in order for me to get into it? And I was having a lot of conversations with a lot of them, and some of the parts where it kind of, I was a little so taken back about was, the communication with some of them. And when we're explaining how we want certain things to be done, they were telling us kind of otherwise. So my wife and I said, okay, why don't we just put a pause on it for a second and let's try to fulfill these orders ourselves, right? Go through it before we can continue conversations. So we were doing quite well, but unfortunately during that time, our day jobs just consumed so much of our time and we put it off on a hold. Uh, and to say the least, we actually didn't continue it. However, now that I'm in this space, we do want to make a comeback. So stay tuned. That probably will be coming out shortly as well. But then I also, after that, was so intrigued with this whole e-commerce and selling online. I was actually an Amazon seller for quite some time. And even then, as a wholesaler, selling primarily in the US market, I went through my fair share of working with other 3PLs. And the one experience that I remember the most is on my very first order. It was a $1,500 order. The 3PL actually lost my items. It didn't even get sent out to the carrier. They lost my items. When I spoke to the owner, he just offered me a credit on my account. And I'm like, to be honest with you, I really don't know if I'm going to move forward with you. Like, you lost all my items. So the experience was kind of not the greatest that I've had in both runs. So years later, things were still selling. I found another 3PL at the time, but I really just wanted to start something because I did a lot of market research into, what kind of 3PLs there are. And a lot of the conversations I had with 3PLs, they were already expecting brands to be established, e-commerce sellers to be established. You need to be able to hit like $1,000 a month. And then that's kind of where I was just like, there's not a lot of 3PLs out here that actually empower founders, meaning like asking a founder, how do you want a package to be prepped, right? Thing for a founder is that when they're trusting someone else with their products, they need to ensure that the end user, the customer, also has the same experience as when the founder was prepping and fulfilling their own products. So this is essentially, I created Get Set Prep. I wanted to be able to allow founders to be empowered by being able to still continue to make decisions. And, I see how overwhelming fulfillment could become, how difficult it is to find that specific logistic partner, right? So I wanted to be able to offer both a strong system, but also a genuinely responsive service where you have someone that can communicate clearly, takes ownership if something were to happen, right? Not everyone is perfect, but also understand that every order represents someone's brand at the end of the day. And I wanted to be able to create something that can solve those problems rather than moving boxes. And one thing that I've also noticed a lot was the fact that a lot of 3PLs that you do work with are very like corporate. So you have like a pricing structure. They will tell you what it is. They move your boxes, they move your products, but there's no flexibility, there's no collaboration. And I really just like working with all the founders that are under Get Set Prep because we work as a partnership and I help them collaborate as well. So that was kind of my journey before Get Set Prep, why I created Get Set Prep, and what Get Set Prep is today.
Amazing, amazing. And I know you mentioned a very good point that fulfillment is A, time consuming, B, is hard as well. We have a lot of founders that listen to this that are, let's say, in the first couple of years of launching a brand. What are the factors that a founder should look at when they're thinking about switching from self-fulfillment to coming to someone like yourself, basically?
So, some of the factors that founders should be really looking at is more about where they are in their business. In terms of right now, as a starting founder, you're always going to be going through fulfilling and prepping on your own. But what a founder should really kind of be looking at is if you're prepping and fulfilling on your own, then how is your business growing? One of the advice I've always been given, especially for a brand or a business to scale, is you should be working on your business and not in your business. I completely understand for founders that your business is your baby and you're going to give it everything that you have. But when a founder is looking at, okay, when am I supposed to be going to a 3PL? It's when it starts to become constraint on you rather than it being something to help move the needle in your business to bring in more sales. So a lot of the founders that we brought on, so I work with a lot of growing CPG founders. So the turning point for them was, Raheem, I noticed that I'm spending a lot of my time prepping and fulfilling, and I am not spending a lot of time of looking at other retail distributions or other selling channels that I should be focusing on. So that's where that point in time comes where it's like, it's time for a 3PL. And the feedback that I've heard from a lot of my founders is because I've brought my items over to a 3PL and because the 3PL handles everything operationally in terms of shipping my product, making sure that the carriers are coming in and picking it up, making sure that my inventory is warehoused. Even a lot of the CPG brands, they have expiry dates and lot numbers. So making sure that that first expiry date, the date that's expiring the soonest, gets sent out. Things that they don't have to think about operationally anymore. Now they take that time and focus on marketing and sales. And I've personally seen more than 75% of our brands since they've joined us start growing in sales month after month and year after year. So it's understanding that line of when operation and fulfillment starts becoming a constraint on you and the business.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because I completely agree. I mean, like, a lot of, like, I guess, on mentors in the entrepreneurship space will keep talking about the fact about you got to work on your business, not in your business. But let's say a founder
Yes.
has realized that in the end, they realize that I need to go speak to Raheem. I don't need to go speak to Raheem for a quote or whatever for 3PL services. What should a founder have figured out before they come to someone like yourself? Like, what are the questions that you're going to be asking them that they should be prepared for
Yeah.
when they're going in?
No, it's a really great question. So here's kind of where I would position this as. So when someone is coming in for a quote, right, they have to kind of take a look at this quote and understand and be able to plug in these numbers. But in order for me to give a quality quote, what I usually ask founders to prepare for are different like categories of information. So the first one I would say is kind of like their order profile. So understanding what are your monthly orders? How many average units per order? How many items? Because a lot of CPG brands as well have different SKUs. So if you came to me and said, Raheem, I have 1,000 orders, what are those 1,000 orders? Are they single item orders? Or are they different SKUs where it's a variety pack? Because that also makes a difference. Because sometimes what you'd have to do is pre-kit a variety pack, for example, and then that is going into one of the orders, whereas it's rather than just picking one. So the first thing that I always ask them is understanding what their order volume is and what are they selling and what is the order count like by itself, right? The other part I always ask them as well is to know what their products are in specific. So the number of SKUs, have your carton dimensions and weights, barcodes, handling requirements ready. The reason why it's really important is because, especially for direct to consumer brands, they will always kind of ask, hey, Raheem, how much would it cost me to ship to, let's just say, Ottawa, for example? But if I don't have like the dimensions of what your package and the weight would be in advance, it's really hard for me to get you a quote. So I like to try to give them quotes as accurate as possible. There might be an approximate or a give and take of about like $8, but I want them to be able to understand, what is the dimensions and the weight of that product. And then also for like CPG products, what's also really important is to include things such as expiration date. What are your shelf life rules? So for example, some products, they can't exceed 23 degrees, right? Ensuring that you have all of that information. If any of them are glass, how do they need to be prepped? What have you done? So that's something that's also important. The other part that I ask them as well is to understand a bit more of their inbound profile. So what that means is, how does your inventory typically arrive? Are your pallets organized? Are your pallets mix match where we'll have to organize? If you're sending us a container, is it floor loaded? How often are your containers or pallets coming? Is there a packing list, right? Because as soon as we do the receiving, we want to ensure that what they have told us is coming in as an inbound. Also, we want to make sure all of that is accounted for, right? If something is not accounted for, we've always report it back. And then I also ask them what's really important is what channels are you selling on? Is it on Shopify, Walmart, Amazon, WooCommerce? How are your wholesale orders being fulfilled today? Are you sending it by email? So understanding that, because it also plays a factor into what other administration work will we have to complete for someone, or when you provide us with this inbound, do we need to kit anything for you? Does anything need labeling? Do we have to UPC? So similar to kind of what a co-packer does there. But again, we want to make sure that when we receive items, we know exactly how we're going to be receiving and what is expected from us. And then I would say the final thing here is about the forecast and what their inventory plan is. So a lot of the founders I work with will say, Raheem, once we get to 2 weeks worth of product, which might be about 200 units, we need to be able to put in another order or start sending you more items from our manufacturer. So understanding what their forecast and inventory is, because what's really important is the warehouse also needs to know what the current volume is, what's, a reasonable 6 to 12 month outlook for them, where, because you'll also what I also get a lot is people telling me, hey, Raheem, we have this many orders, but when it actually comes in, it's not that many orders. So just to even understand, in my last month, I did this month. Last year, this month, I did this much. Then you can start to understand what their trajectory will be, which is really important, right? I think the best thing a founder can do is kind of bring 60 to 90 days of order data, right? I think the quality of a quote is only as good as the quality of the information behind it. Because when you give us mixed data that doesn't make sense, that produces surprises later because there's more stuff and more items that need to be done. So that's kind of high level of what we look for and what I'm asking founders.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that, what should the founder be asking the 3PL so that they don't end up losing $1,500 worth of inventory like you did, like
What's really important about what a founder should be asking a 3PL are how are you, for example, receiving an item? So if I give you a packing list, I tell you my container's coming, how is that getting offloaded off a container, or how are my pallets coming off? Where are you storing all of these items? Will we have a specific section? How are things within the warehouse being labeled? I think what's another important question to ask is, what is your turnaround time? So turnaround times means once the order comes in, how long does it take for you to get that item out where your carrier is coming in and picking it up from you? So it's, what's really important with what founders kind of look at when it's a 3PLs, a lot of founders will also look at square footage of a place where it's really more about how is the work being completed, right? It's not always about looking at the cheapest price. It's about, okay, how are my pallets being stored? So when a 3PL can like clearly explain, even who it serves, for example. So one of the things that founders also, I noticed, do not ask, which I think is a really important question to be asked, are what kind of clients are you not a good fit for? So a lot of 3PLs, what you'll start to notice is that they want to take on every single job they can, right? Their plan is to grow this warehouse and what they're doing really highly, but founders are not asking a lot, what kind of clients are you not a good fit for? Because some clients will come in and say, I need refrigerated items. And I've heard 3PLs say, oh, we'll figure it out, but really they can't figure it out. So when a 3PL can also explain clearly who it serves best to a founder, it also makes that founder say, okay, you know what? I can actually trust this person because they're at least being able to tell me who they can work with. Because if you try to take everything on and personally as an owner you can't, that's what kind of tends to make that relationship fail. So I would say for a founder's perspective, it's best to know what the inbound process is, what the storage process is, how do you pick and pack. If a package gets damaged when it's within your warehouse in your hands, how do you compensate for that? What will you do in order to find a solution, or how do you, I guess, problem solve? But then also who's not a good fit for you as well, right? Understanding all of that will actually tell you a lot about who that warehouse and 3PL is. Something else I wanted to mention as well, which is really important, is even when a founder is trying to request a quote from a 3PL, what's really important as well when a founder is looking for a 3PL is things such as communication, right? How is this person's communication with me? But also, do you mind if I come for a visit? Because I think that's really important as well for them to come in and understand the process and understand how everything is. It really will shift the perspective of a founder.
Yeah, and that's a great point there. Like going in for, let's say, an in-person visit. Let's say I walk into the warehouse, I walk into the 3PL as a founder. Like, what am I looking at? Like, what are some signs that, because they could be saying all the right things, but what are some
Yes.
signs that I should be looking for, like when I'm walking around to see that green flag, red flag, green flag, red flag?
Yeah. So, you know what? It's a really good question. So the way I look at that as in a founder's shoes is that, so when you first walk into a warehouse, you want to make sure you're walking into a warehouse that's clean. You want to walk into a warehouse that's organized, where it's labeled that this could be this customer, or if they have a racking system or bins, everything is clearly labeled and identified, right? I think that's extremely important. When a founder walks into a warehouse, what's also important is understanding the entire process while you're there. I think that is the truth in everything. Start from receiving and get them to walk you through that entire journey. So let's just say my items are being received. Where are they being received from? Get them to show you the docs. When you go to the doc, say, okay, so once the products come from here, where do you take it next? See if they have sections that are clearly identified, for the warehouse, like here's my inbound section, here's my outbound section. So, okay, once my pallet comes in and it goes to the inbound section, what are you doing? So kind of walking them through that journey, I think is such an amazing thing to experience, because you'll say, oh, you know what? This is actually what really goes on in a 3PL because a lot of people, when they think about 3PLs, like, okay, they're going to receive my items, they're going to do all of these things, but don't really understand the flow. And sometimes someone will say, the truck is here. 10 minutes later, how, are the pallets out? Are the pallets counted for? It's like, well, there's a lot more that goes into it. So taking that journey is really important. And then kind of looking at the locations. Okay, where are they going? What are they going to be doing? How are they going to be labeling my products? How will they be able to identify what is what? And then also looking at their packing area as well. So now that you have the journey of saying it's been inbounded, we've walked around, this is how they're going to do our inventory. Now, let's say an order comes in. So you take that box, you go to their packing station and say, how would you pack this? So you want to know what their process is and how they're handling items, but also I would also recommend looking at how the staff are within the warehouse. So if you see staff that are just working and they're going to the computer, they're picking an order, and they just look like they're seamlessly just walking around the warehouse, knowing exactly what they need to pick, where they need to go, that's a really good warehouse and a 3PL because they understand where all their products lay. But if you're starting to see people that look a little bit nervous and don't know where they're going to pick the products, that kind of tells you that that 3PL needs a little bit more work because they don't understand where all of the items are. And then again, that can become an issue later down the road because you obviously want to make sure that there's a lot of accuracy. Again, cleanliness is important. So you want to also identify how do you, when you store my products, how are you storing it, right? So it's the first expired date part comes out. So first out rules. You want to make sure that it's the sanitation, is there, pest control? Are your floors clean? And then just, yeah, again, the pace and the mood of the workers are really important. And then something that I encourage everyone to also do is when you go there, see if one of the workers can actually pick and pack a live order. Again, that all comes back to making sure that, hey, they know where everything is located. They've had conversations about it, so they know where everything is going. But if someone kind of goes to the system, sees an order, and then it's like, okay, where is this person's pallet stored? Then obviously, okay, some work needs to be done. So it's just kind of, again, going through that whole journey and also speaking to the staff there. Are they friendly? How are they? Right. So I think that it's more about how everyone is within that warehouse, the cleanliness of the warehouse and the journey of when your product comes into when your product is getting shipped out.
That's great. And that was a really in-depth explanation as well, Raheem. So
Thank you.
perfect. So let's say imagine that, I've come in with the right data for you to give me a good quote. I've asked you the right questions. You and me have taken a tour of Get Set Prep together. Now you come in with the quote. As a founder, and I know you might be giving away secrets here, but it's like what parts of the quote are actually negotiable and what parts are maybe not?
That's a good question. Answer to that. It's a really good question. So my answer to that question is, listen, it's not always about negotiating a rate card. It's also negotiating on flexibility. And that's something that kind of founders also need to understand is if I'm working with someone, what can we negotiate here to ensure that business is flowing seamlessly? My products are going out. One thing that I personally do with every single founder is I will actually speak to them to understand their consistency and volume. The reason being is because I sometimes, for some founders, will create a plan to get them to where the rate card on the financial side is, because I want to ensure that any business that is using us is still profitable. So that's one thing. Now, not all 3PLs would act that way, and that's fine. And again, founders need to understand that that's okay. But the other part of it as well comes with flexibility and negotiating that part. So understanding their SLAs on how their orders are being sent out. I think orders being sent out, the biggest thing there is understanding with the founder on how need to be packed. So another thing that we do in kind of negotiating is I go to them and say, listen, I'm not going to charge you extra for this because if it takes me an extra couple seconds to make sure that this box is perfect, because at the end of the day, it's your customer's experience that it all comes down to. If they had a good experience, they're going to continue to keep purchasing and they're going to tell others about your. So it has to be around the lines when you're talking about negotiation, there's the negotiating of the financial, but then there's negotiating of flexibility. And warehouses are able to be flexible. There are some that unfortunately are not, but there are warehouses that will allow you to be able to kind of negotiate on that as well. The one thing that also helps with negotiation, it all just starts with the data, right? Understanding what your order flows are coming in. I understand from a founder's perspective, they always try to negotiate with warehouses into getting down the price the lowest, but also please do remember that when you are going for that lowest price, you also should be expecting that type of quality of work as well. So when we use kind of like the word negotiating, it all kind of comes along a lot of other areas where I would say rather than a warehouse negotiating, it's about how can a warehouse be more flexible to my future growth as a founder and a brand owner? And also, how can they be flexible in terms of how my packages are going to be sent out for my customer's experience?
Percent. I'm guessing would an example, I guess, be let's take it of examples is like, maybe we reduce uh my prices a little bit, but then I promise a certain billing for every month. Would something like that? That's kind of what it would look like. Or?
Yeah. So what I normally do based on like my conversation with founders is that I would provide them with the rate card. And I always tell everyone, like, come back. If there's something that you see that will throw your business into a negative, like be open with me. The one thing I ask everyone is I want openness and transparency. It's because I give that back to everyone, right? So when someone is open with me and says, okay, Raheem, my business right now, based on the past 30 to 90 days, is this is how much I'm selling. However, if I start incorporating all of your charges, so for example, like a storage fee, it adds on, it kind of hurts where we are. So I say, okay, so based on the last 3 months of your data, if we take fulfillment over from you and let's just say that I don't charge you a storage fee for the next 1 to 2 months, what will that mean for you? And then we work our way up to that rate, right? Now, if there's a couple dollars where I need to be a bit flexible, I'll do it. I have no problem with that. But I need to understand where they're coming from. So again, the openness, the transparency, understanding the data and the volume that they're bringing will allow me to better give them more flexibility on the financial aspect of it as well. And then the other part of it, again, like I was mentioning, comes back to the services that the warehouse provides, right? So if I had to put, I think like, for example, color shredded paper inside of a box times what some 3PLs will say, well, I have to, it takes me more time to make sure everything is neat and not one paper comes out. So we're going to charge you a bit additional. So negotiation and flexibility that a warehouse should do is to understand from a founder's perspective that I know that if I just take an extra 10 seconds to ensure nothing is hanging out of this box. So when I send it out for delivery and the customer gets it, it's a nice clean package and the customer will be happy. So you can negotiate that with them as well. Right. So it all plays a hand and a role.
Definitely, definitely. It was a great answer, and I'm curious on like on like maybe in a space where there's physical products. I'm sure there's a lot of stories, fires to put out. What's the closest Get Set Prep has come to like a challenge where it could be like a lost shipment, could be a mislabel, could be just anything else, and then how are you able to kind of handle that and then kind of solve that? Of course, you don't have to mention names of the companies, but any
Yeah.
examples would be great. Yeah.
So let me think about this one here. Actually, there was an interesting fire that we had not too long ago. So we brought on a new client. And so when we brought on a new client, we got their products in and then we had them. So we took their products and we replaced them with another client's. We have different aisleways in our warehouse. So we put them in an aisleway that an existing customer was there. And one of the staff forgot to label or relabel that section. So again, right, labeling is extremely important. And not every 3PL is perfect, but you learn from your mistakes. So what happened is that when an order came in, they packed the order, but unfortunately put a shipping label for the other client, right? That was supposed to go out. So what happened there was their client messaged them and said, I didn't order what came in this box. Like, I don't even know what this is. And then we found out that what happened there was that it got relabeled, the shipping label on two different packages. So Once we found that out from the one client, we immediately reached out to the other client and said, "Hey, there's a chance that one of your clients, most likely this one client, got the wrong box. Can you just please confirm with them?" We found out that it was the wrong box, and what we did on our end was we first of all fixed the label so that doesn't happen again. But we took ownership of it. So what I did was I covered the cost to have these orders sent back out. I spoke to both of my clients. I explained to them that I'm extremely sorry for what has happened, but I will take full responsibility of being able to cover the cost for both of these products on both of your ends. We will cover the cost of shipping. So what I did was I didn't just go to them and say, "Hey, what did it cost you to make this?" I went on their Shopify and made an order. We fulfilled it. They fulfilled it manually on their back end. So if anyone knows Shopify, you know how to do that. But we went onto their Shopify and placed an actual order and gave and paid them for what exactly that's supposed to be on that Shopify, right? So a lot of other 3PLs again would in their agreements would just cover you for what the cost was, but we went in and said, look, we have to make this right. So we paid them in full for what both clients paid for. We sent out the items to each client and just said, hey, your other boxes, you guys are more than welcome to keep them or dispose of them. You don't have to send anything back. Everything is covered. And then we covered all of the shipping. So, it's a 3PLs will make some mistakes, right? And even before as an e-commerce seller, I always thought everything had to be perfect. And if something did get misshipped, how could a warehouse do that? They're supposed to be perfect, but really, no, everyone does make mistakes. It's just more about do they take ownership? How do they take ownership? And it allows you to start building more trust and saying, okay, well, when this happened, so now that they've learned, they've fixed everything, that we're very fortunate never happened again. But again, when you're looking at something like this, the way I look at it is that like when you're working with a 3PL, in my opinion, trust is never proven when everything goes right. It's proven by, what someone does immediately after a mistake has happened and the accountability and the ownership. And again, that now comes back into that flexibility category to make things right. And then after that, we were able to, yeah, continue business as usual.
That's amazing. I mean, that shows the fact that you guys take that ownership, and it's surprising how less that happens in the 3PL space, so
Yeah,
kudos to you guys on that. Raheem, this was great. The last question that I always like to ask all the guests that come on about their space is that what do you know now about running a 3PL that you wish you had known on the first day of when you started Get Set Prep?
that's a good question. I think the biggest thing, what I wish I knew then was an RF scanner. Believe it or not, that has saved us a ton of time and created so much efficiency within our warehouse. So when I first started, again, just like any founder, I started with just myself in a warehouse, right? Everything that I did was all up in my mind. We did have a warehouse management system at the time, but obviously organization could have been done a bit better. And at that time, I was just trying to put pieces together and you're going through all of these steps and these hurdles and growing pains. And I was fortunate that a bit earlier in my business, when we grew out of one space into another space, is when I started to introduce like RF scanners. I know I haven't spoken a lot about it throughout this interview, but honestly, what's really nice about it is it allows me for a few things. So one of the things that the scanners do is they help me significantly with inventory, and we make sure that when we are doing accuracies of pick and packs, these scanners, man, they're so great because everything has a UPC on it. We have everyone's items programmed so that way we make sure accuracy is at 100%. It also is something that helped us afterwards of the mislabel as well to make sure that everything is being scanned properly. So that's something I've shared with the staff, but it all comes down to how do I create better organizations? What tools can I implement in order for me to run the warehouse more efficiently when it comes to inventory, order accuracy, and whatnot? I think one of the other things that I know now that I didn't know before, even if we were to look into the vision of me being a seller at the time as well, is that I always just thought 3PLs were receive your items and send your items, like I mentioned earlier. But now what I know is that, 3PLs have a lot more that they actually have to be able to do rather than just working with you. Because even as a seller, I used to be like, how come they're not responding to me quick enough? it just makes you always think that you're the only client, but they have so many more other clients. So I think that's really important. And also, yeah, so I would say on both perspectives, the warehouse perspective is my art of scanners. Absolutely love them. But then as a seller or a founder in a selling brand or a CPG brand, it's more about, okay, there's multiple other um, sellers that they work for, and that they prep for. Sometimes mistakes can happen, but it's okay as long as the honesty is there. Would be something that I would say, I now appreciate more being on this side of the business.
Definitely. Rahim, this was great. Thank you so much. It was a very, very comprehensive, overview of choosing the right 3PL. And I hope people listen to this, founders listen to this, end up putting this into practice and choosing the right 3PL. Where can people find you? Where can people reach out to you and learn more about Get Set Prep?
Yeah. So you can go to our website, www.getsetprep.com. I would say recommend please start off there. We're also on socials. I believe it's Get Set Prep TO. You can find more information about that. The one thing that I do as a 3PL owner is I have my personal phone number on the website. You can literally reach me at any given time because I find as an owner to be able to connect with every founder is always something that's really important to do. And for everyone out there that is listening, whether you're already working with a 3PL or you're not, or if you just want to ask questions, again, go to my website. My phone number is there. Reach out to me. I literally have an open door policy. Work with other brands that don't even work with us, but I help them in terms of giving advice and what to look for and how things can be done at their current 3PL better. So I always encourage everyone, the space that I'm in, it's not supposed to be, you can only ask me for questions if you work with me. I'm an open door at the end of the day for everyone. And that's how I've always lived life. You can reach out to us on our website, socials, and then, yeah.
Amazing. Well, we'll link in the show notes, website, email, a phone number, all that stuff so people can reach out. And
Perfect.
yeah, Rahim, this was great. Thank you again so much.
No, man. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.